The shattered abyss was a riddle no one had been able to solve. It appeared on the edges of humanity's most advanced space charts, an enormous rift, dark and impenetrable, where time and space warped in ways that made the most experienced astrophysicists question everything they knew. For years, it remained a mystery, a danger too great to approach. Until now. Captain Alara Voss stood on the observation deck of the Eclipse, her ship. The stars stretched out before her, the vast emptiness of deep space, broken only by the faint outline of the abyss. Its jagged, irregular shape on their instruments seemed to pulse in sync with her own heartbeat, a living, breathing presence that beckoned. She couldn't ignore it. Not when humanity's future lay within reach. Voss wasn't a dreamer. She had never been one to chase legends or follow the whispers of myths that existed in the dark corners of the universe. But this was different. The abyss wasn't some distant, unreachable enigma. It was there, just beyond the edge of known space, waiting to be explored. And she, Alara Voss, was chosen to lead humanity into it. The ship's crew was an eclectic mix of brilliant minds. There was Dr. Julian Reed, a neurophysicist with a background in quantum mechanics, whose research had, until now, been relegated to theoretical physics. There was Lieutenant Kayla Morrow, the ship's tactical officer, whose expertise in alien technologies and ancient defense systems was unparalleled. And then there was Captain Voss herself, the steady hand capable of navigating both the stormy seas of intergalactic politics and the infinite dangers of uncharted space. "Captain, we're approaching the entry point." Kayla's voice crackled over the comms, her tone as cool and professional as ever. "All systems are operational. We're ready to proceed when you are." Alara nodded, though she could feel the tension knotting in her stomach. It wasn't fear. No, she wasn't afraid. But the magnitude of their mission weighed heavily on her. They weren't just exploring the unknown. They were plunging headfirst into a force that defied the laws of physics. If the abyss was a weapon, they were about to walk straight into its firing range. Dr. Reed's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Captain, I've been running simulations on the gravitational anomalies we're about to encounter. The data is unsettling. If we lose control of our trajectory, even for a moment, the eclipse could be ripped apart. But that's not the worst part. I'm detecting what might be energy readings from something living, something inside the abyss, and if it's alive, it might not be happy we're here." Voss turned toward the main console, where Reed's data was flashing across the screen in bright red. "So it's not just a natural phenomenon. Someone, could be waiting for us?" "Exactly," Reed responded. "I've never seen anything like this. The abyss doesn't follow any known rules of physics. It's as if it has its own consciousness, its own will." Alara took a deep breath. This was bigger than any of them had anticipated. But they had no choice. Humanity needed to know what lay beyond the abyss. They needed to understand what caused it, and if possible, how to harness it. "We're going in," she said, her voice steady. "Full speed ahead, Lieutenant. Prepare for the unexpected." The ship's engines hummed louder as the Eclipse powered forward, the abyss growing larger on the view screen. The moment they crossed the threshold, it would be impossible to turn back. As they neared the edge, a strange sensation gripped Alara, a pressure in her chest, as if the very fabric of reality were closing in on her. She glanced at her crew, their faces tense, eyes wide with anticipation and fear. Each of them had trained for this moment, yet none of them could truly prepare for what awaited them. And then, with a jolt that nearly threw Alara from her seat, they crossed into the abyss. Instantly, the stars around them blurred, as if someone had smeared a painting. The ship's instruments flickered, the steady hum of the engines warping into an eerie, distorted pulse. For a moment, everything felt wrong, unnatural. "We're in," Lieutenant Morrow said, her voice taut with unease. But Alara couldn't focus on her crew's reactions. Her eyes were locked on the view screen, where the abyss had consumed them entirely. The stars were gone. In their place, The void stretched on endlessly, dark, cold, and silent. Then, without warning, something moved. The eclipse shuddered violently, as if it had been struck by an invisible force. Alara gripped the armrest of her chair, her knuckles turning white as the ship's hull groaned under the strain. For a brief moment, the lights flickered, and then everything fell eerily silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems. What the hell was that? Kayla's voice rang out across the bridge, her eyes darting from one display to another. Alara leaned forward, her gaze locked on the main view. The stars had vanished entirely, replaced by a swirling mass of shifting darkness. It was as though the eclipse had plunged into some kind of cosmic whirlpool, spinning without any sense of direction. The abyss itself seemed to have no end, no beginning, just an infinite, consuming void that enveloped them. "Status report," Alara barked, her voice cutting through the tension. Shields holding, Captain, Lieutenant Morrow replied quickly. "We're still in one piece, but whatever that was, it came from within the abyss. Energy readings are spiking, off the charts." Dr. Reed's voice came through, quieter than usual. This isn't like any anomaly I've ever seen. The readings don't correspond to any known physics. I'm detecting distortions in the space around us. It's like time itself is warping." Alara turned toward the science station, her stomach tightening. Reed wasn't prone to exaggeration, and the unease in his voice was unmistakable. "What do you mean, distortions?" "I'm not sure," Reed replied, his eyes flicking nervously to the screens. "It's like the space between us and the abyss is bending. Things aren't where they're supposed to be. I'm seeing stars that shouldn't exist, patterns forming out of nothing. And this is the worst part. There are fluctuations in our timeline. It's like we're moving in and out of different moments. Some things are happening, out of order." Before Alara could respond, the ship jolted again, even harder this time. The force sent her sprawling from her seat, her shoulders slamming into the floor. She quickly scrambled back to her feet, heart pounding in her chest. The air around her felt heavy, thick with an unexplainable pressure. It was as if reality itself was breathing, pushing in from all sides. "Report," Alara shouted, her voice hoarse. "We've lost internal gravity." Kayla's voice rang out from the control panel. The crew's movements grew sluggish as they adjusted to the new sensation of weightlessness. "I'm rerouting power to the stabilizers, but this is abnormal." The lights flickered again, and a high-pitched hum began to emanate from the ship's hull. It was a low, almost mechanical sound, like the resonance of something ancient, powerful, and far older than anything humanity had ever encountered. The hum intensified, growing louder until it felt as though the entire ship was vibrating. Alara's breath caught in her throat as the air around her shimmered. Time seemed to stretch, elongating each second into an eternity. In front of her, a projection began to materialize, images of her own face, her own body, but distorted, twisted in ways that felt wrong. These were not the familiar reflections she knew. They were her, yet they weren't. Her heart raced. She wasn't just seeing images. She was seeing versions of herself. One version of her was smiling, laughing, staving on a distant, lush planet with a family she had never had, a life she had never lived. Another was standing alone on a barren world, her hands stained with blood, a look of cold determination etched on her face. And then another, she was kneeling, her hands pressed to her head, as if in agony, her eyes wide with terror. "Captain, what's happening?" Kayla's voice trembled as she looked at the projections of Alara that were appearing around them. Is this some kind of illusion? A hallucination? Alara tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The images of herself continued to flicker in and out, distorting in the same way the space around them had. Each version of her seemed to reach out, as though trying to touch her. The sensation was overwhelming, dizzying. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. It felt as though they were speaking to her, communicating in some language beyond words, beyond thought. "Captain," Dr. Reed said quietly, his voice breaking through the surreal fog. We're experiencing a temporal anomaly. It's trying to pull us into different timelines, different versions of reality. These aren't just projections. They're echoes, fragments of possibilities. The abyss is showing us alternate outcomes, alternate lives. Alara's mind raced, but there was no time to dwell on the implications. The ship was still moving, still spiraling deeper into the abyss. Whatever this place was, whatever this force was, it wasn't just trying to trap them, it was manipulating their perceptions. It was testing them. We need to get control of the ship, she said, forcing herself to focus. All crew to your stations. This isn't over yet. But as she said the words, the projections intensified, and a deep, bone-chilling voice echoed through the ship's comms. The voice was not human, nor was it entirely alien. It was something different. Welcome, Captain Voss. The voice vibrated through the hull, shaking the very core of the ship. You have come to the edge of everything. Will you step beyond it? The crew froze. The abyss was speaking to them. And it had just begun. The voice, deep and resonant, reverberated through the very bones of the eclipse. The crew stood frozen, their eyes wide in disbelief. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, a force that seemed to reach directly into their minds, bypassing their ears entirely. Will you step beyond it? The voice repeated, this time softer, but no less powerful. It was like a question wrapped in a command, impossible to ignore. Alara's heart hammered in her chest, her grip tightening on the console. The air in the bridge had turned heavy, oppressive, and the once stable surroundings of the ship now felt like a dream, a phantom reality. The projections of herself still flickered around them, but now they seemed to move with purpose, staring at her with their hollowed, knowing eyes. Captain, what is this? Kayla whispered, her voice strained. It's inside my head. I'm not sure, Alara said, her own voice tight as she tried to focus. But we need to hold it together. Whatever this is, it's not just an anomaly, it's alive. It's testing us, and it knows us. Her eyes flicked back to the twisted, shifting stars outside the viewport. The stars were gone now, replaced by a swirling darkness that seemed to be alive. A massive, roiling sea of blackness that stretched to infinity. She could feel it, deep in her gut. The abyss was not just a rift in space, it was a living entity, an intelligence that reached beyond their understanding. Dr. Reed's voice cut through the tension. Captain, I've isolated the origin of the signal. It's coming from everywhere. There's no specific source. It's surrounding us. The abyss itself is speaking. The words hung in the air, too impossible to grasp. Alara turned back to the view screen, where strange geometric patterns were beginning to form within the abyss, shapes that defied logic, shifting in and out of existence. They weren't natural. They were designed, and as they moved, they seemed to be drawing closer to the ship, becoming more defined. I'm initiating a scan, Kayla said, her fingers flying across the console. But I don't know what we're dealing with. It's like the entire space we're in is somehow constructed, but by who and why? Before anyone could answer, the ship lurched again, sending everyone stumbling as gravity once more distorted. The floor seemed to tip and tilt, as if the eclipse were suspended in some kind of reality-warping vortex. Alara gritted her teeth, fighting to stay in control. Brace yourselves, she ordered as she leaned forward into her command chair. We need to focus on getting out of this distortion. We can't let it get to our heads. As the crew fought to stay grounded, another distortion rippled through the ship. The voice returned, deeper now, filled with an ancient, terrifying power. You were not the first to seek the abyss, Captain Voss. It was more like a thought than a sound. Many have come before you. Many have failed. A shadow passed across the bridge, a flicker of something dark that moved just beyond the edge of their perception. Alara squinted, her breath catching in her throat. For a brief moment, she thought she saw figures, human figures, standing within the dark shapes their faces twisted in expressions of agony, frozen in time. Were these past explorers? Was the abyss showing them the fate of those who had come before? Alara shook her head, focusing on the here and now. "Everyone, hold on," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to resist this. We've trained for the worst. We've trained for this." The voice continued, now mocking, condescending. "Resist? You are already part of the abyss, Captain. It is too late to turn back." Suddenly, the ship's systems began to overload. Alara saw the power grid flicker on her display as lights throughout the bridge dimmed, and the hum of the engines grew erratic. Panic began to build within her crew, but she could feel a cold determination settling in. This was the test. This was what they had come here for. "We don't know how to escape this," Dr. Reed said, his voice rising in desperation. "The readings, they don't make sense. We're trapped in a loop. It's as if we're locked in an infinite moment." "Not for long," Alara said with quiet resolve. "We are humanity. We don't accept defeat. Not now, not ever." With a sharp command, she ordered Morrow to engage the ship's experimental quantum drive, the one they'd only tested in simulations. If they couldn't outrun the abyss by normal means, they would have to break the boundaries of space-time itself. It was a desperate gamble, but if there was a chance of survival, this was it. "Activating now," Kayla responded, her hand steady as she input the sequence. The drive hummed to life, and for a fleeting moment, the ship seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. The dark void outside distorted even further, folding in on itself. Then, with a sharp lurch, the Eclipse was thrust forward into the unknown. The ship streaked through the abyss, its engines screaming as they pushed the boundaries of reality itself. But as they traveled deeper into the rift, a new presence seemed to watch them. Something far more ancient, far more aware than they could ever comprehend. And in the distance, just beyond the edge of the unknown, something stirred. The Eclipse lurched violently as the quantum drive screamed at full power, pushing the ship faster than anything in known space had ever traveled. The crew held on, their bodies pressed into their seats as they fought the gravitational forces trying to pull them apart. Alara's knuckles were white, her hands clutching the armrests as the walls around her shook. For a brief moment, it felt like they had pierced through the very fabric of reality itself. The distorted visions outside the viewport became more intense, the abyss folding around them in jagged, nightmarish patterns. Each rotation of the ship sent new ripples through the fabric of space-time, as though they were being pulled by unseen hands, dragged further into the black heart of the cosmos. "Captain, we're not stabilizing," Kayla's voice cracked through the static of the comms. "I'm trying to adjust the drive, but we're slipping. There's something pulling us back." Alara could hear the desperation in her officer's voice. "What do you mean, pulling us back?" she demanded, though she already knew the answer. The abyss wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it was not letting them go. A series of explosions rattled through the ship, sparks flying from the control panels as power surged unpredictably. Morrow's voice came through, low and tense. "We're losing power. The core's starting to overload. If we don't cut the quantum drive soon, we'll breach the containment fields. We'll be destroyed." A sudden realization hit Alara like a wave. The abyss wasn't just a barrier, it was a predator, a force that consumed everything it touched. They weren't just trapped, they were being hunted. "We have to stop," she said, her voice grim. "Morrow, Kayla, shut it down. Now." Kayla's fingers flew over the console, but the system fought her every step of the way, the controls warped by the interference of the abyss. "It's not responding. Before she could finish, the ship bucked again, and the walls trembled as if the Eclipse were caught in a storm of unseen forces. A deep guttural noise filled the air like the growl of some massive ancient creature. The lights flickered out entirely, plunging them into darkness. The sound of the ship's emergency alarm. "I don't care who or what you are," Alara growled, standing and locking eyes with her crew. "We are humanity. We never give up. We will find a way out of this." The voice seemed to laugh, a dark, resonant sound that echoed in their minds. "You misunderstand, Captain." It was as if the voice had suddenly become amused, an ancient intelligence playing with its prey. "I am not the one who traps you. You have trapped yourselves." The view outside the ship seemed to shift again, and Allura's stomach lurched. The abyss was no longer just an endless black void. It had become something tangible, something real. Dark tendrils of energy reached out, warping the space around them. The fabric of reality was unraveling, and Allura could see glimpses of things that should not be. Cities of impossible architecture, creatures that defied description, worlds in flames, and others frozen in eerie stasis. These were all possibilities, fragments of what could have been, and each one was a reminder that the abyss had existed long before humanity had ever discovered it. Dr. Reed's voice trembled as he spoke. "Captain, the ship, the distortion is merging with our timeline. We're no longer just observing it. We're a part of it. Every second we stay in this place, we're becoming it. We're becoming part of the abyss." Allura's breath caught in her throat. The implications were too vast to process. But she knew one thing for sure. If they didn't act quickly, they would be lost, not just in space, but in time itself. The abyss wasn't just a force. It was a place where past, present, and future collided, where the boundaries of reality were torn apart. She turned to her crew, eyes steely with resolve. "We fight. We survive. We make it out of here, together." With grim determination, Allura turned back to the view screen. The dark tendrils of the abyss were closer now, surrounding them like a web. She could feel it, a presence pressing down on the ship, growing heavier with each passing second. The crew's every breath seemed to synchronize with the hum of the ship, the only sound left in the universe. And then, as if responding to their defiance, the abyss gave a shuddering pulse of energy. The ship lurched violently, throwing everyone to the floor. Allura slammed against the console, her vision blurring, but through the chaos, she saw it. A rift, a tear in the fabric of the abyss itself. It was small, but it was there, the only way out. "Now," she breathed. "Get us to that rift, full throttle. Don't stop until we're through." The eclipse surged forward, the quantum drive roaring back to life. But the abyss wasn't done. It would not let them go so easily. As the rift loomed larger, the shadows stretched, and the voice whispered, "You cannot escape what is already inside you." And with that, the eclipse hurtled into the unknown. The eclipse tore through the rift with all the ferocity of a wounded animal, its quantum drive pushing it through the tear in the fabric of reality. The very air inside the ship was thick with tension, the crew strapped into their seats, their faces drawn and pale, knowing that every moment was a battle for survival. The overwhelming pressure of the abyss still clung to them, like an invisible weight pressing down on their bodies and minds. For a few agonizing seconds, it seemed as though they were nothing but a small, fragile vessel caught in a cosmic storm, helpless against the forces of the universe. Then, with a violent shudder, the ship broke free of the rift, and they were suddenly thrust into an entirely different space, an emptiness that stretched far beyond anything they had ever encountered. Allura gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. The stars that had once seemed to guide them were gone, replaced by an endless void where there were no points of reference. It was like being in the middle of an ocean, but with no horizon, no shore, just infinite blackness, and in the distance, barely visible, was a glowing anomaly, an enormous, pulsating sphere that seemed to draw all light toward it, as if it were the very heart of the abyss itself. What is that?" Kayla asked, her voice barely a whisper. Is it the source of the distortion?" "I think we've found it," Allura said quietly. "That's not just a signal or an anomaly. It's the center of everything, the source of the abyss." Dr. Reed's voice cracked through the silence. "Captain, this doesn't make sense. The ship's systems are failing. The readings from the sphere, it's alive. This entire space is being sustained by it, fed by it. We're not in normal space anymore. We've crossed into something beyond comprehension. The crew stared at the glowing sphere, unable to look away. There was a presence there, a weight that pressed on them even though they were light years away. It felt as though the sphere was watching them, feeling them, studying them. And they, in turn, were drawn to it, unable to resist the pull. "We need to get closer," Allura said, her voice firm despite the growing unease. "We need to understand what we're dealing with before it consumes us." She turned to Morrow, set a course for the sphere, full thrust. "We need to get as close as we can without triggering whatever it is that's keeping us from leaving." Morrow nodded, his face grim. He engaged the thrusters, and the eclipse began to move forward, cutting through the darkness like a knife. As they drew closer to the sphere, the ship's systems began to glitch again, the flickering lights and static sounds making the atmosphere feel increasingly oppressive. Then came a sound, a deep harmonic hum that seemed to come from all directions. It reverberated through the ship, shaking the very walls. Allura's chest tightened as the hum grew louder, vibrating through her bones. And then the voice returned. Not from the ship's comms, not from the air, but from within her own mind. A cold, ancient voice that seemed to whisper just on the edge of her consciousness. "You are closer now, Captain Voss." The voice was low, almost purring. "Closer to understanding, but are you ready to face the truth?" Allura swallowed, her throat dry. "What truth? What is this place?" "This place is beyond your comprehension," the voice intoned. "This is where the stars die, where realities bleed into one another. You're standing at the threshold of everything you've ever known, and nothing will ever be the same again." As the ship neared the sphere, the hum became a thrumming pulse, vibrating the very air. The glowing mass was alive, its surface shifting and swirling like a storm of energy, its core radiating an eerie, blinding light. But there was something else, something darker, beneath that light. Shapes, not quite human, not quite alien, flickered in and out of existence, as if something within the sphere was attempting to communicate or perhaps reach out. "We can't stop now," Allura said, more to herself than anyone else. "We have to find out what's inside. We're here for a reason." Suddenly, the sphere pulsed, a shockwave of energy emanating outward, and the ship was rocked once again, the systems malfunctioning as alarms blared. The crew gripped their seats, their bodies thrown forward, but it was more than just physical force. There was a presence inside the pulse, a consciousness that seemed to surge through the ship, seeping into their minds. "Welcome, humanity," the voice said, now softer, almost gentle. "You are the first to reach the heart of the abyss. What will you do with what you find here?" Allura felt a chill run down her spine as the voice wrapped around her thoughts. Something deep within her stirred, a recognition, a sudden awareness that they were no longer just explorers, but part of something far greater. Something that could reshape everything they had ever known. And as the eclipse drew ever closer to the heart of the abyss, she realized with a dawning sense of horror that they might not be the ones who would control their fate. The abyss was alive, it was watching, and it had plans of its own. The ship lurched again, more violently than before. The hum from the sphere intensified, now so powerful it rattled the crew's teeth, vibrating through the very core of their bones. Allura's head spun as her fingers gripped the armrest tighter, trying to steady herself. Outside, the strange, glowing mass of the sphere seemed to pulse, as though it were breathing in sync with the chaos around them. Keela's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, the systems are failing. We've crossed some kind of threshold. We're no longer in control. The ship's aligning with the sphere's energy field. We won't be able to stop if we get any closer." "We're not stopping," Allura said, her voice a low growl. "We need to understand what this is, why it's here. We can't back out now." But as soon as she spoke the words, A deep, shuddering pulse rippled through the ship. For a moment, everything went completely still. The hum ceased, the alarms cut off, and the ship was suspended in a terrifying silence. It was as though time itself had stopped. And then there was a voice. Not in the comms, not in the air, but directly in their minds, reverberating with the force of something ancient infinite. You are not the first to seek the abyss. Alara's blood ran cold as the voice filled her thoughts. She could hear the others gasping, their own minds invaded by the strange presence. The voice was not just speaking to her, it was speaking to all of them. Many have come before you, drawn by curiosity, by the promise of knowledge, the voice continued, but none have returned to tell the tale. Morrow's voice broke through the oppressive silence. Captain, I'm seeing images, visions, I think. A vast expanse, endless, like we're looking at the past and the future at the same time. It's all connected. Alara turned to him, her heart pounding. What do you mean? What are you seeing? Morrow's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. It's everything. Entire civilizations dead and gone. A galaxy in ruins, but also thriving. Every decision, every consequence, every twist of fate. It's like the universe is unfolding before us. But it's too much. I can't process it. His voice cut off, his eyes glazed as though the visions were taking over. The crew's faces were etched with the same confusion and terror. They were being shown things no mortal mind was meant to comprehend. Too much information, too many realities, too many possibilities to process at once. It was all folding together, past and future, reality and fiction, until the very fabric of existence seemed to bend under the strain. Then the voice spoke again, this time with an edge of something darker, more knowing. You seek knowledge, Captain Voss, but knowledge comes with a price. A sharp pain pierced Alara's skull, as though something was prying into her very thoughts. Her vision blurred as the energy from the sphere intensified, filling the ship with an oppressive pressure that made it harder to breathe. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen power. You cannot bear the weight of what you seek, the voice whispered. None can. Alara gritted her teeth, trying to push against the force invading her mind. I can handle it, she spat. Humanity can handle anything. But the voice only laughed, a sound that reverberated through her skull, seeping into the very fibers of her being. Perhaps you believe that now, but you will see, the voice said softly. What is given can also be taken away. The words lingered in her mind as the light from the sphere flared, washing over the ship. Suddenly, the ship's systems went haywire, the monitors flashing wildly, and the hull groaned under the strain. Alara could feel the energy surging through her, rushing into her mind, but also into the eclipse. The ship was being overwhelmed, and no one knew how much longer it could hold out. What you take, Captain, will cost you more than you realize. Alara's grip tightened around the console as her head swam with the weight of the voice's words. We can take it, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but even she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the ship returned to normal, at least as normal as it could be. But the sense of foreboding, the feeling that something had shifted, was undeniable. The energy from the sphere had passed into them, the ship, the crew, everything. Status? Alara asked, her voice hoarse. Kayla, who was still at her station, nodded slowly, her face pale. Systems are online again, but something's wrong. We're seeing fractures in the space-time continuum around us. Reality itself is unstable. I don't know how long we can last in here. Dr. Reed was now standing, eyes wide as he looked at the screens. Captain, it's happening. The ship's quantum core, it's reacting with the sphere. The fabric of our reality is starting to tear apart. This is bigger than we thought. We're too deep now. We're being consumed. The ship shuddered again as the energy from the sphere pulsed once more, and Alara felt it, the cold grip of something ancient, something far beyond their understanding, tightening around her. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the abyss, it seemed, would exact its toll. The price of knowledge was now becoming clear, and it would cost them more than they ever imagined. The eclipse groaned under the pressure. Alara could feel it, a low hum in her chest as the ship systems buckled under the weight of the forces tearing at the very fabric of reality. Every console flickered, every screen glitching in a maddening dance, displaying nothing but static and incomprehensible symbols. The lights dimmed, then brightened again, as if fighting to stay alive. "We need to get out of here," Kayla said, her voice strained. Her hands flew over her controls, trying to stabilize the ship, but the energy from the sphere continued to pour in, feeding off the eclipse's own power. "It's not going to let us go," Morrow muttered from the helm. His knuckles were white on the steering controls as the ship veered sharply to the left, almost out of his control. "The pull is too strong. We're locked in." The reality around them seemed to warp, bending like a liquid mirror. Alara's stomach lurched as she caught glimpses of impossible things. A sky burning with unfamiliar constellations, a planet shattered into pieces, an alien city where no city should exist. The edges of the universe seemed to be collapsing in on itself, and they were caught in the middle. "What do you mean, locked in?" Alara demanded, straining to keep her voice calm, though her heart was racing. "We can't stay here. We have to." Before she could finish, a powerful pulse of energy surged through the ship, rattling every system, throwing the crew from their seats. The hum of the sphere reached a crescendo, and then, with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, everything stopped. Alara's vision blurred as her senses overloaded. Her mind was suddenly bombarded with flashes of impossible images: alien beings, ancient civilizations, galaxies colliding. The air itself felt charged with a sickening energy. Her thoughts became a chaotic mess, and for a moment, she wasn't sure where she ended and the ship began. A voice, no, many voices, echoed in her mind, a chorus of cold, alien intelligence. "You have come seeking understanding, Captain Voss, but now you will witness the cost of that knowledge. Time, space, and matter are collapsing around you. The truth you crave is not one that can be held in fragile human minds. Your species is not prepared." The voice was everywhere and nowhere, reverberating in her bones, in the marrow of her thoughts. Morrow's voice broke through the oppressive silence. "I'm losing control. The ship's collapsing. The rift is spreading out of control. We..." Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, and the viewports chattered into static. The stars outside twisted, swirling into a vortex that looked more like the eye of some ancient, unfeeling god than the infinite expanse of space. The fabric of reality itself was crumbling. "Hold on," Alara shouted, trying to take control of the ship's failing systems. The console was dead in her hands. A massive pulse of light shot out from the sphere, and the ship was consumed in the explosion of energy. The eclipse was flung backward through the abyss, tossed like a ragdoll through a black, storm-tossed ocean. The crew screamed, the sound muffled by the overload of energy flooding through their bodies. Time stretched and warped, their perceptions breaking down as the very nature of reality collapsed around them. Images of endless worlds, dying stars, and shifting galaxies filled their vision. No, their minds, everywhere they looked, every direction, every thought was overwhelmed by the impossible. The pain was unbearable. Alara's fingers slipped from the console. Her vision was fading, her body pulled away from the ship, as though it too was dissolving into the void. "We can't escape," she thought, her mind struggling to hold onto any coherent thought. "The abyss is alive." "This is the end, Captain Voss," the voice whispered. "For you, for your crew, for everything you've known. You have crossed the threshold, and now the abyss will claim what is its own." And then, as everything spun into a chaotic blur of fracturing light, Alara saw it. A figure, no, an entity, hovering in the darkness before them. It was a being of light, a celestial form woven from the fabric of reality itself, and its eyes, no, its gaze, was directed at her. "You will bear witness," it said, its voice rippling through her consciousness, "to all that has been lost, to all that is forgotten, to all that will come to pass. The cycle is eternal." The light of the entity began to consume her, its tendrils reaching out and pulling her in. Every thought, every shred of consciousness was being torn apart, reconstructed, remade. The abyss was not just a place, it was a living entity, an all-consuming force that reached across all of space and time. "The knowledge you seek cannot be given freely," the entity intoned. "It must be earned in blood. Only then will you understand." And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, everything went dark. The pulse of energy stopped. The stars disappeared. The eclipse fell silent. And for the first time since they had entered the abyss, Alara was no longer sure what was real. Alara woke, but not as she had before. There was no gentle pull of gravity beneath her feet, no familiar hum of the eclipse's engines. She was weightless, suspended in an empty void where nothing existed except her and the infinite dark. The air was still, the silence overwhelming. She couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed, but it didn't matter. The very essence of her being felt wrong. A distant sensation tugged at her, as though a part of her was missing. Her body felt foreign, like she no longer belonged to it. The pain of the abyss still lingered at the edges of her mind, an echo of the intense force that had torn through her. But now there was something new, something far more unsettling. "You've returned," a voice said, soft but penetrating. The same voice from before, but now different, as though it were speaking from within her own mind. "Or perhaps you have never left." Alara tried to speak, but her mouth wouldn't form words. Her throat felt as though it had been scraped raw, her vocal cords too weak to produce sound. Instead, she focused, trying to make sense of her surroundings. But the void was absolute. "You are in between," the voice continued, "between what was and what could be. The knowledge you sought has been given, and yet the cost remains. You are both the question and the answer. You are both the dream and the nightmare." The words made no sense, yet they carried the weight of a truth too vast for her to comprehend fully. Her mind raced, trying to understand what had happened. She remembered the entity, the figure of light that had consumed her, its eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul. And then, nothing. The universe had shattered around her, and now she was here. "It is too late for escape," the voice whispered, a dark thread of finality running through it. "You are beyond the point of return. The abyss does not release those it claims. You have seen too much." Alara felt a surge of anger, frustration. I'm not gone. I won't be lost here." Her voice, finally, broke through, hoarse and ragged. The voice did not respond immediately. There was only a heavy pause, the silence stretching thin and taut like a plucked string. Then it spoke again, its tone almost sympathetic. "Perhaps you think you are the same," it said. "But you are not. You cannot be. What you have experienced has changed you. Your crew, your ship, they are no more. They have become part of the abyss, as you have." Alara's heart clenched, the words sinking into her chest like shards of glass. Her crew, her family, gone, lost to the same force that had torn them apart. She felt their absence deeply, a hollow, aching space in her soul. "You wanted knowledge," the voice continued, "but the price is always paid in blood. You have learned the true nature of the abyss, but it will never release you from its grasp. This place is not a boundary, it is a beginning. The end of your reality is merely the start of something new." Alara swallowed hard, pushing back the tide of despair that threatened to drown her. She had come this far. She had faced the unknown. But she couldn't accept the notion that this was where it all ended, that she, and everything she had known, was doomed to be trapped in this place forever. "No," she whispered, more to herself than the voice. "This isn't the end. I'll find a way out. Humanity always finds a way." For the first time since she had entered the abyss, the voice hesitated, a strange flicker of something, perhaps recognition, echoing through the vastness. Perhaps. The void around her seemed to shift, subtly at first, like a distant ripple across an endless ocean. A faint light began to form, a pinprick in the darkness, growing larger, more intense. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, not the chaotic surge of the sphere, but something controlled, something far more deliberate. Alara's eyes, if she could still call them eyes, focused on the light. Slowly, she pushed herself toward it, her body moving with purpose, though she could still feel the weight of the abyss holding her back. "You would defy the will of the abyss?" "I have no choice," Alara said, her voice steady now, more sure of herself than she had been in the face of the overwhelming unknown. "Humanity doesn't give up." The voice didn't answer, but there was a shift in the air. The light ahead of her grew brighter, and with it a doorway, an opening in the fabric of reality itself, began to form. It was small at first, barely perceptible, but it grew quickly, widening, the edges pulsing with energy. Alara could feel it now, a path opening before her, a way out, if only she could reach it. The voice echoed one last time, its tone resigned. "You have seen beyond the veil. You are no longer just human. But even so, the abyss will follow. It always does." Alara didn't answer. She was already moving, pushing through the darkness, her will stronger than the pull of the abyss. The doorway loomed before her, and as she reached for it, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to let the abyss claim her. Humanity was not meant to be a passive observer of the universe. She would return, and she would make sure that the abyss, whatever it was, would never be allowed to consume her world. And the knowledge she had gained, no matter the cost, would be the weapon that would see humanity rise again. She stepped through the light, and the abyss, for the first time, felt far behind her. For now,